Hi everyone. In just a moment, I will meet my friend Stig Hansen, and some other people will join as well. I am so happy that this guy accepted this invitation. He is a mastermind of creative coding, one of my greatest inspirators, especially during I wrote my master thesis called Creative Coding as a School of Thought. He is a professor for creative coding in a program he founded himself called Coded Design, well, with a few other bright minds, at DMJX in Copenhagen. And yeah, today he will talk about the amazing methodology that he was developing in his doctoral thesis called Deconstruction, Reconstruction, which is a specific approach on developing and learning creative coding and developing visuals, developing graphic design systems with code. Probably you will work with processing. I'm really excited to see if he picks P5JS maybe. But yeah, I'm so hyped about that. Let's see how that goes. Stig, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, Tim, and inviting me and giving me this opportunity to talk to all your wonderful patrons. Hello, everybody, and good to see you. Uh, Thrilled that so many of you have chosen to devote 2 hours of your precious summer evenings around the world, summer afternoons, summer mornings. I guess we're spanning multiple time zones here. So good to see all of you. I think today's meetup here on Tim's Patreon community has to do with a thing that I have been, well, deeply involved in the making of. It's framed as it's entitled Deconstruction, Reconstruction. It's a somewhat, I don't know, cryptic title, could be related to pretty much everything, but it's this particular thing that I will be spending the next 2 hours talking about is actually the title of a paper that I wrote as part of my PhD dissertation on creative coding. And it has to do with the ideas that I have about teaching creative coding to non-coders, more specifically graphic designers, to whom creative coding is very new or very unfamiliar territory. And a little bit of background about this deconstruction, reconstruction technique. I might want to put on a few slides here. Let me just check here. I'll be sharing my screen. There we go. And I have this prepared now. Okay. So I'll just briefly talk a little bit about what it is and how it came about. And then my thought here today is that you're not going to spend your evening or afternoon or mornings listening to me talking. We should be doing something together. So I will hopefully make this short and snappy and to the point, and then we can move on to something that's a little bit more like interactive. So if you want to take a deep dive into the actual paper, this is the QR code that will take you to the official download site. It's open access. You can download it straight from the source. And it's a fairly short academic paper outlining a model that I will briefly talk a little bit more about. It's a model that I found inspiration for in the works of Seymour Papert. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Seymour Papert, but to those of you who don't know who he is or was, Seymour Papert was a really like a seminal, influential character back in the 60s, 70s, pioneering work with computers and pedagogy and teaching. On the photo, you can see Seymour Papert sitting there with a little contraption that he made. It's actually lovingly named the turtle, and I guess it's evident why. It has this little like transparent acrylic turtle shell through which you can see probably a bunch of electronics, but also a couple of wheels and a little pen. And by communicating with this little turtle, through its looks like an umbilical cord almost. You could give simple instructions in a programming environment named Logo to make this little turtle go backwards, go forwards, rotate a specific amount of degrees, and so forth. And you could have it draw, well, crude images on a piece of paper, as you can see in front of Seymour. And he used this turtle to do some scientific tests as to how can you engage children in learning through computation and programming. And what he found was that it's so much easier to have people learn if you give the learners an opportunity to construct something. Also, he said, looking at children mainly, that he found them to be more actively engaged when they were constructing something that had a personal meaning to them. And of course, being children, this could be poems, robots, sandcastles, or even computer programs. Now, I found this writing of Seymour Papert really inspirational. You can also, if you want to read it yourself, find them in a book that he published, namely the one named Mindstorms. But I took his quote and gave it a little, well, literal spin and sort of like transferred it to the audience that I am used to teaching, which is like young adults that have enrolled in the school where I'm teaching, the Danish School of Media and Journalism. And I'm teaching graphic designers, visual communicators, how to work with creative coding. And the Seymour Papert principle of making something that is more has a personal meaning to you still applies, I found. Only we replace the sandcastles and the stick figures with logos, posters, packaging, design systems, etc., etc. So again, borrowing from Seymour Papert, I sort of like took a phrase that he coined, an object to think with, put a little hashtag in front of it, tried to make it mine in these like so me day of age. And then I sort of like coupled it to all of these like specimens that I found using, well, Pinterest in this case. Over the years, I've collected this board with pre-existing graphic design specimens that work well as these objects to think with. The idea here being that if you take some of these pre-existing things, it'll resonate among young graphic design students as something that is out there, something that is real, oftentimes something that has a story attached to it, a story even about the client or the actual designer, or how the particular piece came about, a certain technique, whatever. So there's a lot of storytelling in choosing these specimens. And using these, I also tried to interweave them with the thinking of Seymour Papert. He's talking a lot about constructionism. Constructionism here being something that you use as a fixed goal to aid students' knowledge construction. That is, you take something that is familiar to the students and you sort of use that as a leverage to try to take what the students already know and lift it into something that is perhaps unfamiliar territory. We'll get to that in a moment. It's also, of course, about contextualization, trying to connect what we're about to do in my creative coding classes. That is the activity of programming, but trying to connect that with the activity that, well, the students originally signed up for, making visual communication and graphic design, right? And it's thirdly also about computational thinking. And that has to do with, I guess, a lot of these things that we're hearing about, talking about, writing about, thinking about, also in these in this AI age. But it's also something that has been written about extensively as forecasts from, well, among the World Economic Forum. And they're trying to make these yearly predictions as to the new skills that a workforce has to acquire and has to adopt in order to stay relevant. And through many years now, they have included this concept of computational thinking in their forecasts, in their lists. And computational thinking really boils down to trying to think about what you're doing in a way that you can break it down into something that you can then formalize and verbalize as something that can then be transferred for computers to do, right? In the case of designers, it's often the idea of working on gut feeling or getting this sudden glimpse of divine inspiration. And gut feeling and divine inspiration isn't something that translates well into programming. You have to be a little bit more specific. So really, computational thinking is about you as a designer trying to understand what you're doing, how you're thinking, and trying to really like pin that out into really explicit instructions. So those are the things that I also try to encapsulate in this deconstruction, reconstruction thinking. Well, I won't go into too many details with this particular model, but that's how it's described in the paper. The important thing here is that if we look to the leftmost side, you have two distinct phases, one being deconstruction, and then the other one being, of course, being reconstruction. In the deconstruction phase, there are certain steps attached to it that has to do with trying to understand the object to think with that you have been given by me, your teacher, your instructor, and try to analyze that. And then 3 steps that are related to reconstruction, where you try to reassemble this particular piece only using code as a medium now. And if we look to the rightmost side, you can see my intention here as an educator, instructor, is that we will start off in a domain that is familiar to the graphic design students. They know a lot about graphic design. They have a language to talk about it. They have a keen eye on looking at graphic design, trying to understand the different components that are in a particular design. And they can sort of like verbalize what they're seeing and what they're thinking. But gradually, I'm phasing out this way of thinking and describing things that relates to graphic design and transferring it into the domain of computer science, where it's much more about talking about conditions, loops, repetitions, statements, variables, all of these things that has to do with computer science. Because I found that if we start off by talking about these very like core computer science topics in very early on, at a very early stage in introductory creative coding courses, I would just lose the attention of all my students because they weren't ready for that. It's much more of this like sliding idea of, gradually easing them out of their comfort zone, the graphic design territory, and then trying to relate that into computer science. So I'm just going to show you an example instead of talking about it specifically here in the first step, which is all about, well, perhaps the most easy step in this method, which would be like select. Choose something that you feel for. And I try to really tell my students that it's important here that you choose something that you want to work with on the basis of you just being inspired and motivated and curious. Don't choose it because you think it represents something that is a challenge as a computational topic. It's something that speaks to you more as a designer than a programmer. And well, for this particular case, I opted to go with this. Actually, it's a packaging of floppy disks. I don't know how many of you are old enough to have actually worked with floppy disks. Well, I'm just going to break it down in a moment. Well, for the younger ones out there, the floppy disk would be the 3D representation of the save icon in Word, or so I've heard jokes about it. Why would you 3D print a save icon? But nonetheless, back in the days when I was a kid, we worked with floppies. And floppies is this particular thing here. It's called floppy because the predecessor, which was a 5.25-inch floppy, was indeed very floppy. If you waved it around, it would just flop and sometimes bend in your hands. This is the 3.5-inch model of a floppy disk. It's basically just a piece of like magnetic foil encased in this little plastic wrapping with a little sliding lid behind this little metal shield in the top. And you would store data on these floppy disks, a whopping 0.7 of a megabyte. Sometimes if you could go double density, it would even hold 1.4 megabytes. Wow, how times have changed. Well, inside this little floppy disk, you would find this very floppy piece of magnetic material. And it would spin around, and you would have this like magnetic read and write head that would read something off of it. The thing here is that probably being a manufacturer of floppy disks, Nashua, the company that produced the packaging, thought, okay, let's take inspiration from how we divide data into the floppy disks, because it's actually divided into these like different concentrical rings and then into different sectors. And you could ask the read-write head to, go and fetch the data on a particular track on one of these sectors, right? So you can probably see there's a little system to how it's stored. And if you translate that into the logo, you could sort of like see the resemblance of a rainbow-colored floppy disk with sectors and these concentrical rings, right? I think at least that's my interpretation. That's where they got the idea from. So now we're getting a little bit closer to understanding the context of what we're looking at. Then choosing to go to the next step, step 2, which would be describe. We're still using graphic design terminology and the eye we have as graphic designers to look at this, to try to understand what's actually going on. So if we try to dissect this cover on the packaging, first and foremost, it's a black background that has, the black background and a couple of typographic features on it. The Nashua logo and a little yellow lifetime warranty in the corner. There we go. Then we've got the logo itself, the logo mark, which would be this concentrical rainbow-colored floppy representation. That is made up of, we can see 4 very distinct quarters that each has, counting here, 7 concentric rings. There we go. That's one ring. And each ring is made up of just basically an arc of varying thickness, right? Starting very thick and then gradually easing off. And it's doing so in 4 distinct steps, right? Okay. Next, we have the idea of concentric circles. And of those, we have 7 on the original. And then looking at the colors, I've just sampled some of the colors, and we can see, besides the white and the black, it's essentially just this rainbow hue. So this is the cover or the packaging dissected into like atomic elements, right? For now, I'll just disregard the black background and the typography. And I'm urging my students as well to just ignore that, because I've seen that if I say you've got to recreate the typography, that is actually a chance for my students to just ignore programming and take a deep dive into a font book and try to flip a couple of 100 pages to find the exact font with the logo. And that's just a distraction. So I'm saying, like, just go with, take the typography, just brutally copy paste it from the original and just slap it on once we're done. Let's focus on what I think here is the more important thing, the logo itself. So next step would be a more like thorough analysis of what we are looking at. If I were to give a little like a blueprint almost, hence this like blue engineering-like background, if I were to give a blueprint of how to construct this logo, I would probably say, first of all, draw 7 concentric circles. Then the circle's diameter increases evenly from the inner to the outer diameter, just to give an idea of how they're evenly spaced out. The circle's color, it's a rainbow gradient ranging from red in the innermost circle to purple in the outermost circle. Then divide each circle into 4 repeating cycles. And each cycle is divided into 4 segments with evenly increasing thickness. And each circle then has 4 times 4, that is 16 segments, right? And each segment is an arc. So that is just one way to sort of like be more specific and formalize what we're looking at into something that a computer could potentially be fed and then recreate, right? So up until now, steps 1, 2, and 3, we've been working with our eyes, our mind, perhaps pen and paper. I find it immensely helpful to make a couple of like hand-drawn sketches while we're analyzing to try to really understand what's going on. But we haven't touched a computer, or at least we haven't opened up any computer programming environment yet. But this sort of like changes when we go from step 3 to step 4. Because now we just need to convert this recipe that we have given to ourselves into something that a computer can work with. So if we take a look at this recipe that we've just made and just sort of like look at it one at a time, the first instruction, draw 7 concentric circles. To me, at least, that would imply the existence of, say, a variable. I've just named it num circles and set it to 7. It would also probably hint at a kind of a loop. I've chosen to go with 4 because that way you can control specifically how many you want of something in a for loop. So that would be the concentric circles. I've also noted that there's some diameters that change from an inner to an outer. So I would probably go with 2 additional variables. Inner diameter, I've set it to 100. And outer diameter, I've just set it to 600. And then also naming something about the circle's colors, rainbow gradient. Whenever somebody's mentioning rainbow gradient and I'm thinking processing P5, I'm also thinking color mode HSB. The hue, saturation, brightness. It's much more suited for rainbow colors, right? And also, of course, the use of the functions color and lerp color. Again, skipping a bit forward here, num cycles, we had 4, again, using a for loop. Each cycle has also got a number of segments. Now, I've inserted a little bit of like min thickness and max thickness here, and just hinted at we've got to do a little bit of math to work that out, but we'll look at that later. And then each circle is also something that has 4 times 4 segments. And these segments are drawn using a stroke weight, stroke color, probably also a no-fill. And then finally, each segment is an arc. So just looking at this example from something that I've just formulated by looking at it and tried to describe using words, I can take that recipe and sort of like go through it step by step and give myself a bunch of clues to both variables, functions, etc., that I want to use in my code. I don't know the level of my audience here tonight. Some of you may be really advanced, and this may be very like noob stuff for you. But thinking of those that may be very early on in your creative coding career or journey, this hopefully will be some way to provide you with a little bit of like more structure or scaffolding that can help you actually try to translate something and not get lost totally on the way. Also for you that might look at this recording tonight or even later in the future, sorry. If any of you are educators, hopefully you will take a look at this as some sort of like a proposed pedagogical didactical way that may inspire you to use it one-to-one or even come up with your own. So moving on then, looking at the functions that we have found in our little recipe, it's time to actually start using them in the code. And as my students try to flesh out the code that they want, sometimes occasionally they come up with having to look in the reference, particularly if you are very new to creative coding or the syntax of processing or P5 that I'm using. So in this particular case, when we encounter the function arc, it's very useful to spend a few moments to actually try to look it up in the reference, talking a little bit about how do you look things up, how do you read this syntax paragraph, how do you look at the parameters, what do an A, B, C, and D actually mean, and actually try to talk new learners through how to read this reference, because it's, as I'm sure we all agree, it's really immensely useful. So once we look at that, you can find specific functions. And in this particular case, the arc function is hinting at a start angle and a stop angle. And when we read into that, it says the angle to start the arc specified in radians. And now to some of my students, to most of them, I'd say, this is a complete like, okay, what do you even mean? And radians, like what is that even? So this is a perfect opportunity to just pause and say, okay, so we're encountering something new here, something that we need to discuss, something that has to do with math. But for the purpose of actually wanting to recreate this logo, it's actually worthwhile spending some time to really understand what radians is. So I will use that as, trying to translate all of these like emotions that they often express when they read something like this into something that is an opportunity for me to talk about something that is really, really, really very rarely seen in graphic design courses. And that is like a unit circle, or even talking about degrees and radians and such. But here, we actually have a purpose. It's important for us to understand this if we want to achieve what we set out for in the start. So this is a chance for me to give a little bit of a lecture of about, what's a unit circle, what is the x-axis, what is the y-axis, how the cosine relate to sine, how do we specify angles that we're used to in degrees using processing. It's a little bit different that, well, usually we've been taught that the 0 is pointing at 12 o'clock, but particularly in processing and other coding environments, this 0 degrees is actually pointing at 3 o'clock. And just to, talk students through this using degrees, which they might know, but then gradually shifting to talking about radians and how 360 degrees is actually equal to 2 pi. And I get, well, some of them get it, some of them don't. But I will often leave this on, well, a blackboard or a whiteboard or something, as something that I've drawn and something as the students can reference or look up at when they're doing their programming. It's just to say that it's very often that, if I had started with this at the beginning of my lecture, it would have taken no more than, like, I guess, 3 minutes or so before people would have zoned out, start checking their phones or considering what to get at lunch or something like that. But here, hopefully by introducing it later, it makes sense, right? So I'm trying to relate it now to something that has to do a little bit about what we want to achieve, and not to make this too long-winded. You're looking at here the video recording of the end result. This is a particular piece of code that, well, a student made, and I was helping them along. And we've defined these variables that we found using this little analysis earlier on, but we've also introduced new variables, and that's part of the like exploration and the tweaking. And you can see here, using the tweak mode in processing, we can now make all of these like visual variations of the original packaging by simply experimenting with like the outer diameter, the inner diameter, the number of cycles, the number of segments, the rotation of the concentric circles, etc., etc. But this is all building mostly on the things that we saw in the original. And for the last step, then I encourage my students to say, wow, okay, you've made it to step 5. You've actually deconstructed and reconstructed one-to-one and a code-based identical copy of the original packaging. Bravo. Now go and have fun. I mean, hack, budge, tinker, break your code, add new stuff, throw out some variables, see what you get. So in this particular case, this is just a continuation of the code that made the original packaging. And now we see all of these like weird and wonderful and really elaborate and complex interpretations that have originated or emanated from the original code. And then finally, I say, well, this has just been one example, this particular Nashra packaging, but it's important that you also realize that what you've just done is not unique to that particular packaging. Like if you look at some of the other stuff that I've found on my Pinterest board, or even stuff that you encounter yourself, you can find lots and lots and lots of different designs that employ the same exact principle of having a circle that is consisting of concentric circles, each drawn with a number of arcs, slightly offset, slightly different thickness, etc., etc. So really think about what you've just made. Now you know how you've made it, and then try to, if you look at something else, try to repurpose what you've just done. So that is hopefully what my students take out of just having one iteration of this deconstruction, reconstruction paper. This particular method that I've just outlined is also described in the paper. It has undergone a few iterations since. I'm still using it in my introductory courses at DMJX, but very quickly, and that may be some of the criticism towards this particular method. Very quickly, when you use this as sort of like a stepping stone to understand the fundamentals and the core principles of how to look, think computationally, and then transfer that into processing, you will also hit some limitations as to what you can actually do with this. The idea here and the main motivation has been that you can sort of like stand on the shoulders of somebody else, be given an object to think with that will allow you to keep your focus on programming. And for that, it works as a charm. It's super in that respect. Of course, then, if you want to make something that is a little bit more something of your own, or if you have ideas of something that you want to make, this method likely will fall short. So at one point, when you move from a total beginner to, I'd say, somewhat intermediate coder, you should leave this behind and try to find other ways to work with this. Let's progress now with something that's a little bit more hands-on. I will probably share my screen here. Let me see. Oh, get rid of this. That's done. And here we go. Okay. See if I can minimize this. No. There we go. Okay, so I forgot to say that, apart from also practicing this in my teaching at DMJX, I'm also using this Decon Recon as a little pastime to, keep flexing and honing my skills in processing in P5, testing out new stuff. If I find new interesting specimens, if I find new interesting algorithms, if I find new stuff that I want to test out, I'm active on Instagram and posting all of these, examples of how the decon recon can be made. But I'm actually thinking we should probably pick one and see if we could try to replicate that. And the one I think I've settled for now would be this one. Nothing better here on a hot summer's evening in Denmark to take a little deep dive into glitch aesthetics, right? Some really like black and white, stripy, messy stuff. So I think we should make something a little bit more like similar to this. We don't have to make the exact copy of the original. I would probably along the way now encourage you to experiment with colors, even adding images and such. But just to do a very like a quick run of the decon recon idea. I found this original that we have here. Make sure to give credit to the original author, which in this case is Ingmar Spiller, who made this original piece here as a poster to promote a theater play called Nina. And we can definitely see here that it has sort of like two distinct parts to it, a very like black bottom and this stripy upper 2/3 of the piece. And then everything in here between is just glitched, offset, looks like something that is a little bit scrambled or decoded TV signal. So this is the aesthetic that I was trying to recreate. So let's just now try to perhaps together move into, I'm using processing. You can code along in P5 if you want. Perhaps even if you take the same overall principles, you could even do it in, I don't know, Touch Designer or any, coding platform of choice. That will just make it like this. There we go, getting organized. This is my basic boilerplate. We don't want to use that. We want to start from scratch. Okay, so okay, let's do this. First of all, I want to save my sketch, not just because I want to keep it, but also because I want to be using tweak mode along the way. And a prerequisite to be able to use tweak mode is that you have your sketch saved before you activate tweak mode. So just gonna go ahead and choose save. I'm gonna call it Spiller Remake. There we go. Put it on my desktop. Okay, so let's begin with a setup and a draw. Okay. And I'm gonna set a size here that will probably fit my screen. I'm gonna go with 756 times 1080. And I'm just gonna make a black background. Here we go. And if I run that, well, no big surprise. Here we have a totally pitch black background with the dimensions that I've specified here. So far, so good. Now, if I want to perhaps make the stripes that are present in the original, perhaps I should just do a little for loop. I could do that to repeat a certain number of stripes. I could also try to go with like a while loop, for instance. Let's just, for this fun of it, try to use a while something here. For is just like you have a specific counter that will increment until a specific criteria is met, and then it's gonna exit. And for loops you can often use to have something being repeated a specific number of times. While loops, on the other hand, is, as the name implies, something that is running as long as a specific condition is not returning false. So in this particular case, I will probably make a little, I'll make a little float count. No, I want to keep it as an int. Do I? Yeah, I want to do that. I want to make a little integer called x position, which will control the distribution along the x-axis of these like shifting and alternating white and black bars that I will make. I will set that initially to 0, okay? And now I can say while x position is less than the width of my sketch, then whatever is in here will execute. And of course, obviously, it'll keep executing for as long as x position is smaller than width. So it'll stay that way forever if I don't do something to expose in here. So I will need to increment expose by something here. And I would want to make that well, we can make it, I could go like 10 here. Plus equals means just take whatever valuable x position has and add 10 to it. Okay, so now it would probably run. Gonna test it out. It's running, but of course, obviously nothing is drawn, but this while loop here is actually doing its thing. Now, I need to draw something in here, and I need to draw something that is a rectangle. And I will just choose to go a rect with its x position being my x pose here, and the y position in the upper left corner being 0, because yeah, I want to keep it to the upper part of the canvas. And then I'm gonna choose, I could go with, yeah, 10 here again. And then I want it to be, giving it a number here, 500, just an arbitrary number. So I could do it like this. And if I'm running it now, nothing's really happening here. Well, a number of things take place here. First of all, let me see. I'm drawing a while loop before the background, okay? And that's a very common mistake that some of my students make. It's actually drawing here, showing it correct, and then I'm using this background 0 to just get rid of everything that I've just drawn. And because it's happening in one iteration of the draw loop, well, I don't get to see the nice thing that I'm drawing here. I just get this pitch black background. So what I want to do is move background from the lower part of the draw loop up until like the top part of the draw loop. There we go. Now we can see I'm getting these white rectangles that each has a stroke around it. So the first thing perhaps I want to do is get rid of the stroke. So I'm going to go no stroke. There we go. Run it again. And now we can see they're all white. So the little stroke disappeared, but we're still having very individual rectangles all the way across the canvas. Now, if I want to make every second one of them either white or black, I have a number of different options. I could have, if I've used a for loop, could have used something like the modulo, which is a mathematical operator that you can sort of like have it return 0 with a specific number of increments. But since I'm using while here, I don't have that luxury. I'm going to come up with another way to control this. So I'm probably going to introduce a little Boolean, and I'm going to call it is white and set it to true in the beginning. And then in here, inside my while loop, I will go fill. And now I have to choose fill. Should it be 0 for black or 255 for white? Well, that should depend on whether this Boolean is white is either true or false. Now, I can do this a little bit long-winded. And for the sake of being pedagogical, I'm probably going to do that. So I'm going to go if is white equal true, then fill should be set to 255. Else, and then we can assume that is white is false, then fill should be set to 0. Okay. Do a little indenting, clean it up, and there we go. So this is actually asking, what is this particular Boolean? Is white? Is it true? Then fill with white. Is it false? Then fill with black. Now, if I run it, it's still white. And that's because this is white Boolean is always true. It never change it. And it's true from the beginning. So what I'm going to do here is that, I'm going to go is white is equal to false. And now here is white is equal to true. So when I've drawn one that is white, I'm going to flip this and make it false. When I've drawn one that is black, I'm going to flip this again and make it true. So now we have alternating bars. Okay. I could do this in another way. I might just as well show it, just for the sake of, perhaps some of you will learn something new here. I could use what is known as a ternary operator. It's a little bit cryptic looking, I know, but it's sort of like a very handy shorthand for choosing something based on some condition. In this particular instance, I'm going to go with having a look at is white, the Boolean here. And I could go like is white equal to true. Then if that is the case, I'm going to use this little question mark. That's part of the ternary operator. And what comes after the question mark is that if this is actually true, this condition, it's going to choose 255 as a numerical value. Else, and that's the semicolon, it's going to choose black. I can even reduce this further to getting rid of this. I can just ask like this, is white? And it's going to return whatever state it is. And then we can translate it to these two. So you can probably see if I run this now, okay, it's still white, but that's because we're not flipping the variable as we're doing here. And just perhaps to learn something else, a very handy way of flipping a Boolean would be to say is white is equal to not is white. Okay. Sort of like standing there in your dining room with your finger on the light switch and then flipping it up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. Just flipping it to the opposite state, right? So in this particular case now, fingers crossed, yes, we get the exact same result as you saw earlier with like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines is now reduced to 2. Granted, they're probably more cryptic to read. So I think for the sake of perhaps keeping this readable in the future as well, let's just skip these two and go back to these. You can keep them if you want, but I'm gonna stick with these. Okay, looking at what we have now, this looks fairly okay. I can notice that what I've chosen here, this 500 numerical value, is not going to go all the way like 2/3 down towards the bottom. And probably also I want to be able to play around with like the spacing between these vertical bars. So let's do a little cleanup of this and remove some of these numerical hard-coded values up towards the top, where I like to keep a little collection of the variables that I want to be able to tweak. That's just my personal preference. I'll leave a little hint to myself saying tweak these. And I would probably want to make this hard-coded value of 10 into a variable called, say, spacing. Set that to 10. and then take this spacing, put it down here, replace the 10 and replace the 10 here. Also, perhaps I could use this variable of bar height, set that to 500. And again, this is just a name that I've randomly made up now. Gonna plug it down here. So you can see gradually I'm trying to get rid of the things that are hard-coded deep inside the belly of my code and move it up towards the top. I don't mind hard-coded stuff down here as long as it's something that is not directly affecting the aesthetics. But if it's something that a little knob that I want to be able to turn on, I'm going to bump it up towards the top. I hope you're following along here. Probably gonna do a little like hands off from here as well. Just to remind myself that, from this point downwards, I shouldn't really tinker too much when the piece is done. So let's have a look at what we've got. Again, looks nice. These variables that we introduced up here are actually working as they're intended to down here. But the beautiful thing now is that saving your code, choosing save, like so, save, and then going to sketch. If you're working in processing, this is a processing feature only, sorry. If you're working in P5, yeah, well, you've got to probably be able to find a way to do that. Perhaps toggle this little button with auto refresh if you're using the P5 editor. But now, at least in processing for you working in there, you've got this wonderful tweak option. And if you press that, you can see something changes. Okay, it's not obvious in the color scheme that I've chosen here, but if some of you have chosen a lighter color scheme, you would see a little underline appearing under these otherwise hard-coded values. And we've even got a little like color box appearing here next to the fill function. So if I'm just going to hover my mouse over the 10 here and drag it, you can see that indeed I can now change this value live and see how it affects my layout. I can even extend this further down if I want. And I think it's such a valuable and underestimated tool in processing, because this is sort of like a one-to-one direct representation of you tweaking a value inside a code environment and seeing with your own eyes that something is changing live in front of you. So to understand the relationship between this variable here and what it does, it's super, super valuable that you can do a thing like this while the code is running. Now, it comes with its own set of things that you have to account for. For example, remember this little while loop down here? And I said that if this X position is never going to exceed the width, we're just going to have one of those infamous stuck while loops, okay? So I'm going to go out on a limb here and actually try to tweak spacing into a point where it becomes negative or even 0. And then, yeah, everything is probably going to break unless we have some, yeah, you can see it's stuck in an endless loop. Nothing's responding anymore. So if I want to do the save thing or present or, save myself from being like really aggravated later, I should probably build in a little bit of like error prevention in here, saying that spacing should be constrained. And I'm using the constrain function here in processing. What I want to constrain is spacing, the variable itself. And I will specify, that's just a choice that I make, that the smallest possible space width should be 2 pixels. And the largest one should be, I don't know, 64. Okay. Again, saving, running in tweak mode. And now you can see I can turn this all the way down to -473. And this constraint is sort of like a little padding, a little buffer that is preventing me from breaking stuff. And when I crank this up again, everything is working as intended. And you can see I can't exceed 64 no matter how hard I try. So this is also a really nice way to just safeguard the code or the values that you put it in here from becoming a nuisance later on. Okay, so moving on then. I hope you're doing great behind the screens and you're coding along. Let's move on to the more like the glitchy part. So with this particular thing working almost as intended now, I can't help myself from wanting to extend this down here. Okay. With this working as intended, giving us some alternating bars, it's now time to copy paste and do some glitching, right? Okay. So for that, I will probably want to use the copy command. And this would be a nice point in my teaching in introductory coding classes to introduce this copy function and say, let's dive into the reference together to see what it's actually doing, because it comes with a lot of parameters. So you can, from inside the processing environment, always like just even, I think, click on a particular function, go to here, help, and find in reference. It's Command Shift F on a Mac. And let me see if it's opening. Sorry. There we are. So it's opening up from within the processing environment. It's opening up the particular copy command in the reference. And this is immensely helpful. Tells a little bit about what it's doing. It's essentially just copying regions of pixel from one image to another. And if we scroll down here to the syntax, we can see comes in different flavors. Comes in a copy flavor that'll just copy an entire canvas or an entire image. It also comes in this particular version, which has 8 parameters, which is essentially just defining some regions of where you want a section of pixels to be copied from and to. And another one here that has an additional source parameter, which is pointing at a certain image if you want to copy pixels from an alternate image or something that's perhaps an off-screen buffer or so. So I'm probably gonna try to go with this one, the middle one, and see if we can copy sections of pixels directly from the main canvas onto itself. Okay. So looking into the first 4 ones, those that have like an S prefix, specifies the X and the Y coordinate of the source's upper left corner, and then the width and the height of the section that we want to copy. Similarly, the ones with a D prefix is the destination. Where do we want to place what we've just copied, and how big do we want to make it? Okay. So with this information, let's try to return back to our code and say, okay, I want to copy something from, let's say random. No, sorry, I'm going to be a little bit more thoughtful about this. Because if I'm just using random, I'm going to get float values. And float values, for those that are familiar with processing, like I know P5 is perhaps more overbearing about what types of variables you use, but in processing in particular, there's a big difference between using integer numbers and floating point numbers. And specifically in the reference, we can see that we want these to be integers. So I'm probably going to go out here with making a new integer here. And I'm going to go with from X. And I'm going to choose a random position on the X-axis. And the X-axis, of course, stretching from 0 to width. Okay. Now, in processing, this is not going to work in itself because random is giving us floating point values, but from x is an integer. So I need to do something with this to turn it into an int. I can either do a conversion like so, wrap it in a little int function, or I could just cast it, as it's also known, like so, putting a little like parenthesis int in front of a random and saying, I know you're a float, but just for a moment, pretend to be an integer. I'm not converting it. I'm just asking it to behave as an integer. This will give me the integer that I'm looking for. Then next, we're going to go with the from y. And similarly, we're going to go for a random value between 0 and height. There we go. Now I have two random points, x and y. I'm going to plug them in here from x, from y. And remember, looking at the parameters here, these are the first two. Now we need to specify the width and the height of what we want to copy. So these are the next parameters. For now, I'm just going to copy a section that is like 100 pixels wide and 100 pixels tall. Now, where do I want to put it? Now we're over here on the D prefix, the D prefix ones. I'm going to go with, a place to put what I've just copied. And similarly here, taking this, copying this, putting it down here. I hope I'm not progressing too fast here. Otherwise, somebody feel free to speak up and ask me to slow down. But I guess you can quite understand the logic of where I'm going with this. I'm making up two new set of x and y coordinates labeled 2x, 2y. This is where I want to put it. And just for now, I'm going to keep it 100 pixels wide and 100 pixels tall, just like the original, okay? I'm really going to cross my fingers now that it's going to work. It's always a gamble when you're doing live coding. But if it's not, I guess we're going to have to see that, getting bugs and figuring out stuff is also part of the equation, even if you've been working with processing for nearly 2 decades. So here we go. Save and run. And wow, yes, something definitely changed. We can see, at least on my screen here, a little section is flickering all across the canvas. It's not giving us the glitchy effect we're after, but we can fix that. First of all, I probably want to fix this like flickering motion. The flickering motion is due to the fact that we're using random here, and random is doing exactly what random's supposed to be doing. For every time I call random, it's giving me a pseudo random number. And that's what's causing the flickering, because this is changing from frame to frame. Just to avoid this, and also perhaps to be able to replicate particular layouts, I'm going to add something here to my tweak. I'm going to call it seed, and I'm just going to give it the number, I don't know, any arbitrary number. I'm going to go with 16. Might as well be 16,000 or minus 32. You choose. This seed I'm going to plug in here, put it here, why not? Using the random seed function. Now, like so. What this random seed is actually doing is, even though random is supposedly random, it's not more random that you can actually replicate a particular random sequence. Okay, so by setting a random seed using this variable, which in my case is 16, I can ask processing to give me the string of random numbers that is set number 16. Okay, and because I'm repeating this in every draw loop, hopefully now when we hit run, we can see, well, nothing is happening, because it's most likely copying something down here. I'm just gonna stop for a moment and extend this down to 900. Hope it works. Yeah, there we go. So you can see it chose to copy from, I don't know, somewhere up here and put it down here. And if I again choose to, yeah, sorry for all the stopping and starting, but I guess that's also part of the processing charm. Write some code, run it, write some more code, run it again. I'm gonna save, and now I'm gonna go with tweak. Now we can see that if I'm changing the seed number here, I get different copies from all over, different places on the canvas. Okay. So now if we look at this one, we can see this is likely the result of not just one instance of this copy command. I would probably think that this has been used numerous times over and over and over, probably with some boundary values to prevent it from ending up here and down here. But let's get to that later. For now, at least, let's go up here and say what we want to do is actually just repeat what we've just written here. We want to repeat this a number of times. So I'm going to wrap all of this in a nice, wonderful little for loop. I guess perhaps the equivalent to Bob Ross and his happy little trees. I'm going to make a happy little for loop down here, and I'm going to ask it to repeat a number of times. I could probably up here in my tweak section, make myself a new integer saying num copy, num copies. Yeah, number of copies. Why not? And ask for, well, 20. Gonna be a little bit like conservative here. Can always ramp it up later. So down here, I'm gonna write a standard for loop, having a little counter, I, set it to 0, have a little condition that is for as long as I is less than num copies, then repeat the for loop. And for every time the for loop repeats, then just increment I with 1, hence the I++. So this little piece of code is now making this repeat 20 times. Save, sketch, tweak. Okay. Num copies, num copies. What am I doing wrong here? Num compies. There we go. Num copies. Sorry. Yep, there we go. Tweak mode. Here we go. Already looking a little bit more glitchy, because the thing that is actually happening here is that, just imagine you're copying something from the canvas, putting it on a canvas. And the next time you're copying something, it's going to copy from the canvas, including your previous copy that you pasted, and so forth. So if I'm really like cranking this number up here, we can see that it is becoming more and more glitchy, because it's now copies of copies of copies of copies, supposedly. Or perhaps it's not. Let me just check here. Well, hard to see, actually. No, I think it is. I think it's working as intended. Okay, we'll leave it here for now. We can fix that later if that is actually the case. So now we have copies of copies of copies of copies. So what I want to do now perhaps is sort of like restrict where we can copy to. Like looking at the canvas, we want to be able to copy from almost anywhere, but we want to paste it in mainly this section down here. Okay, this is not really the optimal choice of cursor. I think it might have something like this little drawing tool. No, I don't. Okay, never mind. We want to restrict the position of where we can put these copies to, say, sort of like the middle part of the canvas. And fortunately, I can do this by just choosing some new numbers here in these 2x and 2y, I can make a little like minus here. I'm setting it at 0 initially just to have a hard-coded number, because then again, through the magic of tweak mode, I can look and see where are these going if I ask them to, well, this is horizontally, don't want to do that. I want to perhaps crank up this number here, get a bunch of copies, and then we can see by using this 2y and asking this to come down a bit to say 320-ish, and then this one to come up a bit, we can sort of like make them clump together nicely around the area where we want them to be. And I can give them a bit more oomph and copy that. Okay. So already looking a little bit more glitchy. And finally, we're not going to make an exact replica. That's for you to tinker with afterwards, I guess. I have 2 more things in mind that I want to try. The first one that we can try also together is perhaps to do something about this, the fact that we're already always copying copies of 100 times 100 and giving them the same size when we paste them. If I do like int, well, copy width and set that to be what's supposed to be an integer between 20 and 200. And I choose to go with copy height, set that to an integer between random, I don't know, I don't want them to be as tall as wide. I'm probably going to be a little bit more conservative here and just go 1050. Remember, we can always change that later in tweak mode. So here now, for every instance of this copy command here, I'm going to go with new values. So they're not going to be 100 times 100. They're going to be unique for every copy. And I'm going to paste them over here as well, because I want the pasted version to have the same dimensions as the copied version. You can always tinker with that later as well. So let's have a look. Tweak mode. Here we go. Giving myself some more copies and giving them a little bit, making them a little bit longer and less tall. There we go. And you know what? I'm suspecting that it is not updating the canvas between each call of this copy, because otherwise I think we would have seen something that is a lot more fragmented and more similar to perhaps these as we've seen here. I want them to have this like smeared look. So let me just try one thing here and ask processing to update pixels and see if that has any visible effect. No, does not. Okay, does not. Well, let me just try to perhaps change this, the renderer, see if that has an effect. No, does not. Okay. In that case, then I would probably, yeah, I would probably do something like an offline buffer. But, you know, let's not get caught up in that. We can still get good results with this, I guess. Yeah, I'm a little intrigued why it's not doing as I wanted it to be and wanted it to. But, you know, never mind. Never mind. Let's move on for now, because I want to have a look at your faces after we've done this little exercise and perhaps a little chat about what you can try to perhaps use that for going forward. What I just want to do now is that, you know, given this pre-existing poster for a German theater play named Nina. Its idea of bars repeating, alternating, copying different segments of that and pasting it on top of each other. What would then happen if we used that or repurposed that mechanic in using a different source than the stripes, for example? What if we were to take an image? Let me just see if I can find something that has the exact same dimensions. I'm going to go here, images, Google. Going to go Danish summer day. There we go. And can I do like, I think there's a way that I can ask for a specific size. Can't remember. Ah, okay. Can't do it this way. Or is it like tools, size? Ah, okay. Can't do that. Never mind. We're going to go with a nice, warm Danish summer day, just finding something that is a little bit more like, there we go. Let's take this. Okay, typical Danish coastline. Gonna save this, save my image, put it on the desktop. There we go, get rid of this. Take this and open it. Probably gonna do a little cropping of this to better fit the dimensions. Also gonna change the size. And I'm gonna do something, everybody, look away. I'm gonna do something like this. Do it unproportionally. Wow, big no-no. There we go. Save it again. Okay, and just label it beach.jpg. Back into processing, import my image. I'm gonna load it into processing, put it in this p-image container, just gonna call it beach. And inside of my setup, I'm gonna load it once using the load image and refer to beach.jpg, which is now in my sketches data folder. And then instead of using background 0, which is turning the background black, because I have an image with the precise dimensions of my canvas, I can actually just go background beach. Wow. So there we go. Now I have a picture of the beach, and I just perhaps for now at least want to, disable the strokes. Doing so, can block comment it out by making this small like slash asterisk and asterisk slash to comment out a whole block of code. And now when I run my code, we can see that I'm glitching or pseudo glitching segments of a nice tranquil Danish summer beach. And that is a totally different aesthetic. Last thing is that, I could also, just for fun, copy these and do like this, and then stretch it, like really say, I'm copying a segment of pixels, one size, but I'm pasting it with some different dimensions. That'll really mess things up, I guess. Hopefully aesthetically for the better. Okay, you see some are really smeared, some are grainy, some are, yeah, you get the idea. There we go. And again, I can make different compositions. Say if I want, crank up the number of copies. And the bar is not going to work here, neither is the spacing, but at least I can make different compositions by just choosing different seed numbers. And say if I browse through these and I find, oh, previous one, this one, 25, that's good. And I can always return back to 25 by just choosing it as the seed number. So this is really handy for being able to regenerate something, even though it's random, okay? And yeah, I think for now, probably I should just hit stop. I have like a lot of ideas exploding in my mind here. You could add a little tint command to make the images that you paste semi-transparent and opaque, and that'll smear them up even more. You could like even paste multiple copies of the same, like copy command of the same image that you copied. Also, perhaps to get this more smeary effect that I was probably hinting at originally, that would imply the use of sort of like an off-screen buffer, which is a topic of another day. But you can see, you can really take this basic idea of copying a segment of pixels onto itself multiple times and achieve different visuals using that.
Hi, my name is Tim and I build TRCC, an online school and a community for creative coding. We live in an age of technological upgrades, obsessed by the new, shiny gadgets and slick surfaces. But there is change in the air. An upgrade is always good, we thought, and now that the world is accelerating at a brutal pace, we realize that we were dazzled. I think it's time for a downgrade, a radically new creative tech education rooted in a few principles. Human creativity first, love for the process, small is beautiful, and code as a fundamental tool. I teach creativity with code embedded in philosophy, and TRCC is for everyone. Join now and start your journey.